Good morning. So when you reach the witness stand, please come around the back. I am going to ask you to remain standing and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give to the jury will be the truth and the whole truth under the penalties of perjury?
Yes, sir.
All right, please be seated. And so, sir, I know the prosecution is going to conduct your direct examination. Before we begin, would you kindly state your name for the jury?
Joshua Colwell.
And Mr. Colwell, the jury can see, and you can see as well on the screen, that there is what's referred to as an order of immunity benefiting you in the sense that you cannot be prosecuted for any information you provide here today that could tend to incriminate you. Do you understand that?
I do.
And have you had the benefit of counsel to explain the significance of an immunity order to you?
I have.
And do you understand that although there is an immunity order, you do have the obligation to tell the truth here?
Yes, sir.
And do you understand that if you do not tell the truth about a material issue, you could be prosecuted for perjury?
I do.
Attorney Hinckley?
Thank you. Please introduce yourself to the jurors.
My name is Josh Colwell.
What town do you live in?
Somersworth.
And do you work?
I do.
And what do you do?
I'm a business development officer for a drug and alcohol treatment center.
And what does that job involve?
I work with different community members, different community resources, and I tell them about the program I work for, and then when somebody is in need of treatment, they'll call me up and I'll help them get into treatment.
And for about how long have you done that job for?
About a year and a half.
Did you have a similar job prior to your present position?
I did.
You're nervous, right?
Very much so.
Okay. You're a recovering drug addict, right?
I am.
Have you also been convicted of drug felonies in federal court?
I have.
What's the current status of that case?
That case is over.
About how long ago did it end?
2 years, I want to say, 3 years. I don't remember exactly.
During your testimony, will you be testifying about your own illegal drug activities back in 2016 and 2017?
Yep, we will.
And for that, you're testifying under that grant of immunity?
I am.
The judge went over it with you, but I want to read it, and then I'll have some follow-up questions. Pursuant to RSA 516-34 by letter dated September 13th, 2023, an accompanying motion, the Attorney General for the State of New Hampshire has requested an order from this court requiring Joshua Colwell to provide testimony in the trial of State of New Hampshire versus Timothy Verrill, which testimony Joshua Colwell may likely refuse to provide on the basis of his privilege against self-incrimination. In his request, the Attorney General has stated that in his judgment, the testimony of Joshua Colwell is necessary to the public interest. Pursuant to RSA 516-34, and based upon the Attorney General's request, the court orders that Joshua Colwell shall testify in the trial of State of New Hampshire versus Timothy Verrill. Further, no testimony or other information compelled under this order, or any information directly or indirectly derived from such testimony or other information, may be used against Joshua Colwell in any criminal case of forfeiture. However, Joshua Colwell may be prosecuted or subject to any penalty or forfeiture for any perjury, false swearing, or contempt committed in answering or failing to answer, or in producing or in failing to produce evidence in accordance with this order. So you went over it with the judge, but again, what do you understand this grant of immunity to mean to you?
So it means that anything I say today can't be used against me in a current or a future investigation on me.
And what is your obligation under that grant of immunity?
To tell the truth.
So getting to this sentence, no testimony or other information compelled under this order or any information directly or indirectly derived from such testimony may be used against you in any criminal case of forfeiture, right?
Correct.
That's your protection, right?
Yes, sir.
It has been suggested, sir, that you killed Christine Sullivan and Jenna Pellegrini.
Right. Why don't you come forward?
Mr. Colwell, it has been suggested or implied that you murdered Christine Sullivan and Jenna Pellegrini. Did you kill them?
No.
Did you stab Jenna to death?
No.
Did you stab and beat Christine to death?
No.
Did you have any role in the death, sir?
No.
Are you going to be testifying about your own illegal activities back in 2016, 2017?
I am.
Did you commit murder, sir?
No.
Before we discuss those events from late 2016, 2017, you've given sworn testimony in this same matter?
I have.
Have you also given earlier recorded statements to investigators and given sworn testimony before a grand jury?
I have.
Have you been given to review the trial transcript or any other transcripts from previous statements or testimony that you've been given? Have you been given the transcripts to review?
No.
What are you going to be testifying based on, sir?
My memory?
Would it be fair to say that at this time, some of your memories as to details such as telephone numbers, you may not remember that?
That's correct.
Are you going to be telling the jury the truth?
I am.
Did you kill those women, sir?
No.
I want to turn your attention to the beginning of 2017. In what town were you living?
What was that?
Let me ask this. You didn't know Jenna Pellegrini, did you?
No.
Did you know Christine?
I did.
What was your relationship with Christine?
I knew her from selling drugs.
Were you friendly with her?
I was.
Did you kill her?
No.
Did you slash her throat?
No.
Who were you living with back at the time?
My ex-girlfriend,
And who was that, sir?
Cassie.
Do you currently have any form of relationship with Cassie?
No.
At the time, what was her last name?
Russell.
Do you even know if she still has that same last name now?
I don't know.
When was the last time you remember having any contacts with Cassie? That you remember?
A few years ago when I was working as a bartender somewhere and she came in for a drink.
Back in 2016, 2017, when you had a relationship with Cassie, where were the two of you living in Farmington?
On Central Street.
Was it 54 Central Street?
That sounds correct.
And in the beginning of 2017, you were selling drugs, right?
I was.
What kind of drugs were you selling back then?
Methamphetamine. Mainly methamphetamine, but methamphetamine, generic Viagra, cocaine.
Were you selling drugs with or for anyone?
Yes.
And who were you selling drugs with or for at the time?
I was selling drugs with Dean, Christine, and Tim.
Tim, that's Timothy Verrill?
It is?
And you see Mr. Verrill in the courtroom.
Yep.
And can you please identify him for the record, describe what he's wearing?
He's sitting over there, wearing a sweater vest, or a sweater, I don't know what, it's a sweater.
May the record reflect that the witness has identified Mr. Verrill, the defendant.
Any objection? It will.
Mr. Colwell, I see you get an emotional when you're pointing out Mr. Verrill. He's your friend. He's your friend, right?
He was my friend, yeah.
We're going to be seeing a lot of text messages. There were friendly text messages between you and Mr. Verrill, right?
Yep.
Testifying here is hard on you for a lot of reasons, right?
Yes.
It's one of those reasons because you're the killer.
No.
Back in the beginning of 2017, what was your illegal relationship with Mr. Verrill?
I sold drugs with him and bought drugs off of him.
For about how long had you had that relationship, the drug dealing aspect? About?
I don't know, less than a year?
When you said that Mr. Verrill, the defendant, would sell you drugs, would that be for your personal use, or would you resell them, or would it be both?
Both.
And you're also friends with the defendant at the time, right?
I was.
At that time, the beginning of 2017, for about how long had you known the defendant and been friends with him? About?
So off and on for a couple years.
And if you can explain that to the jurors, what do you mean by off and on a couple of years?
So I knew him from before. He was roommates with another mutual friend of ours. And so I would go over to that house and Tim would be there.
Was there a point in time where you reconnected closer in time to 2017?
Yes.
About when was it that you reconnected with the defendant, Mr. Verrill? About?
I don't know. I don't, like, summertime, I want to say somewhere around the summertime of 2016.
At the end of 2016, the beginning of 2017, about how often would you and the defendant spend time together?
Quite a bit.
And when you say quite a bit, are we talking that you'd see each other daily, a few times a week?
A few times a week.
Back in the beginning of 2017, did the defendant drive a car?
He did.
Do you remember what kind of car he drove?
I believe it was a CRV.
So up on the screen is State's Exhibit 71. Does the car that's depicted in these photos, does it look like the car that the defendant drove back in 2017?
Yes.
What were some of the things that you and Mr. Verrill did as friends together back in 2016, 2017?
Hang out, listen to music, do a lot of art.
You also talked briefly about your illicit interactions with the defendant, that he would sell you drugs that you would use or resell. What about the defendant in drug use? Did you see him use drugs as well?
I did.
And what kind of drugs was the defendant using in the beginning of 2017 that you remember?
Cocaine, methamphetamine, DMT, heroin.
Jurors probably know about cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin. They heard DMT from a witness yesterday. They may not be familiar with DMT. What is DMT?
It's like a hallucinogenic.
In the beginning of 2017, how would you describe the defendant's use? By that, from what you saw, what the defendant told you, was his drug use increasing, decreasing, or staying the same with respect to previous months that you'd been his friend?
I'd say increasing.
When you were not physically with the defendant, did he and you still maintain contact with each other, both as friends and as business associates?
Can you repeat that question, please?
Yep. When you weren't physically with the defendant, hanging out with him, would you communicate with him both as friends as well as
Yes.
business associates, drug
Yes.
dealers? And how would you communicate with the defendant?
Through phone.
You talked about how you and the defendant reconnected in 2016, began seeing each other as friends frequently. Where was the defendant living when the two of you reconnected?
When we first reconnected,
Yeah.
Farmington,
And where was the defendant living in Farmington?
on Meterborough Road.
That's the 979 Meterborough Road, the house of Dean Smoronk and Christine Sullivan that we'll be talking about?
I don't know the exact number, but yes, it's the house that Dean and Christine were living in.
And when the defendant was living at that house, was anyone else living there with him?
No, I don't think so, no.
What about Dean Smoronk and Christine Sullivan?
Oh, yeah, yes. Okay, yeah.
So that was just my bad question. So the defendant wasn't living with a roommate or anybody, but he was living with Dean Smoronk and Christine Sullivan?
Yes.
And what was the relationship at the time between the defendant, Mr. Verrill, and Dean Smoronk and Christine Sullivan?
I think they were friends and co-workers.
And
per
with
se.
respect to coworkers,
Yeah,
dealing drugs, right?
correct.
Let's talk now about Dean Smoronk and Christine Sullivan. About when did you first meet them? About?
I want to say it was probably late summer. Maybe, yeah, late summer.
And when you say late summer, is this 2016 before the murders that we'll be talking about?
Yes.
In terms of how you came to know Dean Smronk and Christine Sullivan, was that through the defendant, or had you known either Mr. Smronk or Ms. Sullivan independently from the defendant?
Through the defendant.
So the defendant was living with them at the time, and the defendant introduced you to Mr. Smronk and Ms. Sullivan?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
How was it that the defendant introduced you to Mr. Smronk and Ms. Sullivan? In other words, was it a social setting? Was it related to drug dealing, if you remember?
Yeah, it was in relation to the drug stuff.
And how did you start helping the defendant, Dean Smronk and Christine Sullivan, to sell drugs? What was your initial role in that operation?
Was to collect money.
And if you can explain that to the jurors, what do you mean by collect money?
So if somebody owed money to them, they would ask me to go and get the money for them.
And did you actually assist Dean Smronk, the defendant, or Ms. Sullivan in helping to collect drug debts?
Yes.
And how many times did you do that?
I don't remember.
More than a few?
What's more than a few?
10?
No.
Did you also eventually sell drugs as part of that operation?
I did.
And actually, let's actually go back to your role in debt collection. Because we're dealing with an illegal business, right?
Correct.
So how would you collect the debt?
Just being aggressive.
And you're a pretty big guy, right?
I am.
And that's what you did as part of the drug roll?
Yep.
You eventually started selling drugs as well?
I did.
What was the dynamics or the hierarchy of that drug selling operation involving the defendant, Smronk, and Ms. Sullivan, and you? What was the hierarchy for that?
It would be like Dean, Christine, Tim, and then I would be underneath Tim.
So in terms of who would get the drugs to sell, who would get the drugs?
I don't understand the question.
Yep. The drugs would come from somewhere. Who would get those drugs initially to disperse for sale?
Dean and Christine.
And the defendant, would he sell drugs for them?
He would.
And you would sell drugs both for them as well as for your friend, the defendant?
Yep.
I'm sorry, did I hear an answer?
Yes.
So next on the screen is State's Exhibit 32A. Do you recognize the location depicted in these various photographs, Mr. Colwell?
I do.
And what is this?
That's Dean and Christine's house.
The roadway shown at the bottom two photos indicated by the red arrow,
Yep.
is this a driveway that leads up to the residence?
It is.
Was this driveway that's pointed out by the red arrow, is that the only vehicle access to the house?
Yes.
So when you reconnected with the defendant, he was living at this house with Dean Smronk and Christine Sullivan?
Correct.
Was this house referred by yourself and others by any nicknames?
Yes.
And what were some of the nicknames that you referred to it as?
The ranch, the hill.
And what about the defendant, Mr. Smronk? Would they also refer to that by those nicknames that you remember?
They would.
Back in the beginning of 2017, was this a house equipped with surveillance cameras?
It was.
And how did you know that surveillance cameras were at the house?
Well, you could see them.
And where generally were surveillance cameras located at the house from what you remember?
When you first, like when you're driving up the driveway, there was some facing the house. There was some underneath the house facing the door and inside the house.
So there were both some exterior surveillance cameras as well as some interior surveillance cameras?
Correct.
And you knew about them?
I did.
What about Mr. Verrill, the defendant?
Yes.
I want to show you some still photos taken from surveillance video. This is State's Exhibit 30E. First, with respect to these particular stills and other video stills that we're going to be seeing during the course of your testimony, Mr. Colwell, did you review the videos from which these stills were taken?
Yes.
Do you recognize the person who's circled in red in these still photographs?
I do.
And who is this?
That's Tim.
With respect to the 3 color photographs, do you recognize where the defendant, Mr. Verrill, is in those 3 photographs?
I do.
In what area of the house is that?
That's down in the basement.
What about where the defendant is in the black and white photograph on the lower right?
That's also in the basement, but when you first walk in.
And the physical relationship between those 2 rooms, are they right next to each other?
Yeah, it goes black and white to color.
So next on the screen are 2 still photographs taken from State's Exhibit 30. Do you recognize the 2 people in these photos?
I do.
And who's circled in red and who's circled in blue?
I'm circled in red and Dean is circled in blue.
This next slide has the same 2 still photos, and the timestamps on the bottom have been highlighted in red and enlarged, showing about 10 minutes before 4 a.m. on January 25th. We're going to be getting into this a little bit later, but do you remember what generally was happening at the time that these still photographs were taken?
Yeah, Dean was getting ready to go to Florida.
And how was he planning to get to Florida?
To fly.
And from where was he planning to leave?
Boston.
Next are still photos from State's Exhibit 34. The timestamp on these photos is about 90 minutes later. There's a person circled in blue. Do you recognize this person?
I do.
And who is it?
That's Dean.
And you testified that another person who you met through the defendant was Christine Sullivan. What was your relationship again with Christine Sullivan at the beginning of 2017?
I sold drugs with her.
About how often would you have contact with Ms. Sullivan in that time period?
Occasionally.
This next slide has photos from State's Exhibit 30F. Do you recognize the person circled in purple in these still photographs?
I do.
And who is that?
That's Christine.
In the top left still photo, there's a person circled in green. Her back is to the camera, but you, again, saw the videos. We're going to go to that person in a moment. Looking at the car in this next slide, it State's Exhibit 36. Do you recognize whose car this is in the photographs?
I do.
And whose car is that?
That's Christine's.
What about where that car is parked, Mr. Colwell? Is that a place where she would typically park her car at the residence?
It is.
Let's go to that other woman who was circled. Do you recognize this person?
I do.
And who is it?
That's Jenna.
Okay. Back at the end of 2016, beginning of 2017, did you know a woman by the name of Jenna Pellegrini?
I did not.
How you came to know her, that's something that we're going to talk about later in your testimony, fair to say?
It is.
You spoke about this illegal drug dealing business that you were involved in with Dean Smoronk, the defendant, and Christine Sullivan. To your knowledge, was Jenna Pellegrini ever involved in that operation?
I don't know.
When you met Dean Smoronk and Christine Sullivan through the defendant in 2016, what was the nature of their relationship, Mr. Smoronk and Ms. Sullivan?
They were dating.
And they were also living together at the Meterboro Road residence?
They were.
And to be clear, was anyone living with the defendant, Mr. Smoronk, and Ms. Sullivan when the 3 of them lived at the house?
Not that I know of.
And when they were living at the house, they were also selling drugs and using that house as a base of operations, fair to say?
That is correct.
You said that when you reconnected with the defendant, he was living at the house on Meterboro Road. Did at some point in time he move out of that house?
He did.
Do you remember where the defendant moved to? And by where, I mean town, not specific address.
Dover.
What about Dean Smoronk and Christine Sullivan? Did they remain at the house on Meterboro Road when the defendant left?
They did.
After the defendant moved out of that house, did he still frequently go to the house from what you saw and what the defendant would tell you?
Yes. Can I get a drink of water?
Let's move.
He's asking for water.
My colleague's going to get you something to drink.
Thank you.
Apologies. You want to wait?
Nope.
Let's move forward to the beginning of 2017. Was the defendant living in Dover then?
Yes,
And did he have a girlfriend?
he did. Thank you.
Do you happen to remember what her name was?
Crystal, I think.
Next on the screen are photos from State's Exhibit 12A. And again, you saw the video from which these stills were taken, right?
I did.
Who is the man in the white hat?
That's
And
Tim.
who is the woman in the red jacket next to him?
That's Tim and his girlfriend.
So the defendant was living with his girlfriend at the beginning of 2017. What about Dean Smoronk and Christine Sullivan? Were they still at the Meterboro Road residence?
They were.
At the beginning of 2017, were Dean Smoronk and Ms. Sullivan also in their personal relationship as well, the romantic relationship?
They were.
And how would you describe that relationship?
Volatile.
And how so?
Dean was a jerk. I would use stronger language if
Yeah, you actually used it before. How would you characterize how Dean Smoronk treated Christine
he was
Sullivan?
a dick.
Would he often talk negatively, disparagingly about Ms. Sullivan from what you heard?
Yes.
And would he talk negatively about her to both you and the defendant?
Yes.
What kind of negative things would he talk about to you and the defendant that you remember about Christine Sullivan?
We just call her a bunch of heinous names.
What was the nature of the relationship between those three? Mr. Smoronk, Ms. Sullivan, and the defendant, as well as yourself, at this time, the beginning of 2017, pertaining to the drug selling operation. Were the four of you still selling drugs?
We were.
And was the hierarchy still that we talked about with Dean and Christine as the suppliers, the defendant selling both on his own and to you?
Yes.
While you were selling drugs at the beginning of 2017, did there come a point when you started taking over some of the defendant's buyers for him?
I did.
And how did that come about? Why did that happen?
Just because he was becoming pretty unreliable.
Who was becoming unreliable?
Tim.
And at this time, at the beginning of 2017, did you notice a change in the defendant's behavior?
I did.
And what did you see happening with respect to the defendant? What you both saw and what you experienced with him?
He was just getting really paranoid, acting really off.
And if you can explain that more for us. What do you mean by paranoid? What do you mean by off?
Like,
And actually, to put this in context, the defendant is still using drugs at this time, I take it?
he is.
Still heroin, cocaine, hallucinogenics, meth?
So I don't know about heroin,
Objection,
but
Your Honor.
Yes.
I think the question is too vague and he needs to specify how he knows that. And also a compound question asking about a variety of
You can lay a further foundation for how he would know.
During this time, you would socialize with the defendant?
I would.
You would do friend things with him, right?
Correct.
Talked about you two would paint and do things like that.
Yeah.
Would you also use drugs with the defendant?
We did.
And what type of drugs would you see the defendant using in this period of time? Again, about the beginning of 2017.
Cocaine, methamphetamine, DMT. I don't think I saw him use heroin in 2017.
Thank you for clarifying
Yeah.
that for me. So with respect to the defendant's paranoia, his odd behavior, explain that for us. What were you seeing in his behavior that
He
was
was just-
causing you concern?
He was getting just like he was forgetting things. He was getting super paranoid. He was getting pretty delusional.
If you can give some examples, let's talk about the paranoia, for example.
Did you ask for an example?
Yes, with
Okay.
respect to paranoia.
There was a time that I came to his house, and we were talking, and there was it looked like an old-timey camera, is what I recall. And I asked him about it, and then I don't know how long after, a couple days later, day later, he asked me if I'd put cameras in his house to watch him.
And was this something that he was relaying to you as some kind of joke based on his demeanor and how he was saying this?
No.
Did he sound serious?
Yes,
He thought you were spying on him?
he did.
The defendant's changed behavior as paranoia, was that something that concerned you as his friend?
Yes,
Was the defendant's behavior something that you talked to him about?
it was.
More than once?
Yes.
And what were some of the things that you talked to the defendant about his changed behavior?
Just that I was concerned. I offered to bring him to a doctor to get it checked,
What kind of doctor?
like a psychiatrist or some sort of mental health doctor, though I wouldn't have used that verbiage back then.
Did you also speak to other people about the change in behavior that you observed in the defendant that concerned you during this period?
Yes.
Who do you remember talking to that you remember?
Dean, Christine.
You had your girlfriend at this time, Cassie?
Yes.
You remember talking to her as well?
Basis?
Bleeding.
Right, sustained.
At the beginning of 2017, you're selling drugs with Dean Smrock and Christine Sullivan and with the defendant?
I am.
On occasion, did you discuss the drug dealing operation with any of them over a cell phone by way of text messages?
I did.
And when doing so, were code terms used for aspects of that drug dealing?
They were.
And if you could give some codes or some examples of codes that we'll probably see later in some text messages?
Like snowplow accounts. I can't think of any.
And in terms of snowplow accounts, what would they actually be referring to?
Cocaine.
You testified that as well as spending time with the defendant as friends, you contact him by cell phone. Did you also communicate with Dean Smronk and Christine Sullivan by cell phone?
I did.
More so one than the other?
Yes.
Who? Who would you contact more, Dean or Christine?
Dean.
Judge, I'm sorry, did you say 2:15 or 2:30?
Well, 12:15.
I can go to 2:15.
12:15, so folks, we're going to take the lunch hour now. We'll take a full hour, we're going to return at 1:15. I do have a couple of matters I have to attend to in the hour, so I apologize